This is very exciting. Hi, this is Dale Peterson, and welcome back to the Unsolicited Response Show. We've got a great episode today talking DCOM with Dino, but before we get there, I just have to do a little plug for S4. You see, I've got my S4 Create the Future sweatshirt on if you happen to be watching rather than listening. Our S4 event is about 2 months away as you listen or watch this show. It's February 14th through the 16th in Miami South Beach. There's a pre-show events on the 13th that you might want to consider coming down a bit early for. But we are right now selling ticket block 501 to 750. So it's going to be a big event. I think we're going to sell out and have 1,000+ people there. It's very exciting. I think the agenda is shaping up. You can check all that out at s4xevents.com. But there are two things I want to tell you about. One is we have this Women in ICS security program, and all the 100 free tickets for Monday and Tuesday are taken. But the Women for ICS security sponsorship will be closing this week. So if you want to support the cause, get your logo on some signage or such. It's going to be a beach bag, some signage, brake slides, but really it's more about supporting the cause. If you want to help support the cause, it's $2,500, and all that money goes directly into the Women for ICS security program at S4. Mainly, there's a social event that happens on Monday night, a women's only social event, and that helps us defray some of those costs. So that is your last chance this week if you're interested in that as a vendor or an asset owner. The second thing is we have set aside some of the prime spots right outside of the main stage and stage 2 for what we're calling worthy cause exhibitors. These are nonprofits or efforts that are not really commercial that would help create the future. That's the S4 mission, create the future of OT and ICS security. So we have actually 9 slots where we can put people that are doing something that will help make that happen. We can give them some visibility, have them interact with the attendees, and hopefully help them significantly move their worthy cause effort forward. We have 6 of these filled. There's room for 3 more, basically 1 day each in one of those spots. So if you want to do that, you should go to s4xevents.com, whether you want to be a Women in ICS security sponsor, or if you are a worthy cause that you think could benefit from being at S4, make sure you get those in this week. We'll be making our final selections this week on that. And with that, I'm going to stop talking about S4 and get to my interview today. Liz, can you bring up Dino? My guest today is Dino Busalachi. He is the CTO with Velta Technology, and Velta Tech is a systems integrator of digital safety and cybersecurity systems in OT. They're focused on that specific niche. So Dino, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dale. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you got my attention with a series of articles that I was reading about related to something DCOM related. DCOM is a protocol, a Microsoft protocol that's probably most famous for being used originally in the OPC Classic, but also used in a wide variety of other control systems. Not a terribly secure protocol, but then it also had some vulnerabilities that got patched, but those patches seem to cause some problems. So maybe we should start out with the timeline that rose to this DCOM problem you've been writing about. When did the patch come out that it was starting to cause problems?
Well, it's last year in June of 2021 is when they started rolling out to kind of create the knowledge base of saying, hey, this is going to change, just to see how many clients recognized the problems that it would create for their applications that hadn't had these patches applied, right? And the OT space is notorious for not keeping up with their patch levels. So a lot of clients on the OT side don't even realize they got patches sitting there because their servers, haven't been booted in years, in cases. So sometimes those patches, are lined up, just ready to go is the first opportunity of a patch, because nobody's been paying attention. The patch has been pushed out, either inadvertently or on purpose.
Well, and I think in a lot of patching programs that I see, the Microsoft patches are the primary focus. A lot of times people will say they have an OT security patching program, and we're running into this even more. The problem's getting larger with SBOMs looking at component and library patching and such. But I see a lot of patching programs that are restricted to Microsoft patches. Maybe some will patch Adobe Acrobat and some, a couple others, but they're not typically patching their control system applications, software or firmware, is what I see. So this patch comes out in June. Does it cause some problems, or are people pre-warned that problems might be coming?
Well, they've been pre-warned. I mean, groups like Rockwell and Siemens and Schneider and Emerson have been publishing this for the past year. I mean, there's certain system integrators out there have been running entire campaigns just on helping the clients solve their DCOM issues, right? And what I recognize in a lot of the work that we do is a lot of clients don't even realize that they have it, right? And you get into that whole IT/OT conundrum and that relationship. If they're not aligned very well, not working tightly with each other, and they don't even know that they have it, right? And a lot of it is in the hands of some of the OEMs and SIs who are responsible in helping support and maintain those control system applications out there. And they're not moving along either, right? And the way you got to look at it is the Windows that we're predominantly talking about, those Windows operating systems are from a bygone era, right? Not where IT would say, hey, those are pretty current, and then they know what's going on. I mean, you're talking about 7 and 8 and XP that is still found in just about every client I go to.
Did this patch apply, though, to Microsoft operating systems that were current, that were still being supported and updated by Microsoft, or was it just the old ones?
It's a lot of it's the old ones, right? Because the newer ones have already started the hardening process, to a more secure approach to their DCOM patch, and anything that Rockwell or Siemens would have come out but that would have been applicable. It's really about the stuff that's been out there since 06 until now that just haven't been patched in those years, Because you think about 06 is this is when it first came out, right? And so now you're looking back, because it's not uncommon for us to find operating systems that haven't been patched in 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10 years.
But so if I was running like Server 2016, would I need to apply this patch?
You would, if it's going to move you to a more secure hardening to match up with your application. So even though you may have a newer operating system, it doesn't mean that your Rockwell Factory Talk View might be of an older era that you have to get the Rockwell software to match up with what you're doing with the operating system. It's kind of a double-edged sword. They both have to move together.
Well, I think, though, we're talking about two different things here, right? There's this Microsoft patch for DCOM.
Right.
And then there's the compatibility with various
SCADA apps.
Yes, if we can call them that.
Yep.
And so the Microsoft patch Microsoft would still tell you should apply this patch that came out in 2021.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct. They would have you apply that, and then if it broke your application between then and now, they were giving you a way to back out of it and change registry settings so you could get back up and running. But in March of next year, they're going to disable it altogether, and you won't be able to go back.
Okay, so that's I think we're getting there. So patch comes out, like any patch, it has the possibility of breaking things.
Correct.
Especially to the degree that people weren't following, let's say in this case, Microsoft's application writing advice. This was a big problem a decade or more ago, where people were just writing applications without reading Microsoft's guidance. This is how you make them work with Microsoft. So they would work on one version and then they'd break. Now, the vendors have gotten a lot better. Fewer patches have broken things as a percentage. Most of them, if you look at the vendors testing them, most of them say, go ahead and apply it. They'll test it, say everything works fine. But this was one that did break things. And regardless of what operating system you were running on. And for some vendors, even on their current products, it broke things. Like I think Rockwell was an example where even if you were up to date on Rockwell software, you had applied their most current one when this patch came out. When this patch came out, it would cause things to stop working.
Yeah, incompatibility between the app and the DCOM version of hardening or not hardening that was running on that OS on that server.
Which again is why you have to be a little bit careful on any mission critical system, not just in OT, but mission critical e-commerce. You don't just willy-nilly apply a patch unless you can roll back within an acceptable time frame. So most asset owners, if they were doing it right and they were patching, let's say, they would have waited for Rockwell or whoever they were using to approve the patch, and they would have gotten the notice that said, hey, this one will break things. Don't do it, or do it and do these secondary things. So I guess as an integrator, did you run into any asset owners that this patch broke things?
Yes. Yes, even going back, yeah, where if you don't have good backups, you're rebuilding your machine, right? Especially for those folks that are still running bare metal SCADA systems out there versus virtual machines, and hopefully you have good backups and you can get back up and running pretty quickly. But if you don't, then you might be spending the day or two trying to rebuild those machines if this patch is applied. And like I said, some of it's inadvertent. Clients don't even recognize that the patch is sitting there. Just a boot brings it in. They didn't know that it was sitting there. And this has all of the trimmings of a friendly fire activity when it happens, right? Because some people would think that, hey, this is just normal pushing out patches. It doesn't look like nefarious behavior. And all of a sudden, you take that patch and you've bricked your machine. You've lost your ability to communicate across the network.
Mm-hmm. So you did see some people that were affected by this. Now, once you were affected, you alluded to this before, Microsoft provided some guidance as to how to back your way out of this problem.
Right.
And what was that?
They gave you some registry key settings to be able to go in there, manipulate, to be able to go back to a previous version, to unlock it, to go back to the previous version of DCOM. So the first one was pretty easy. The second one was a little bit harder. And then like I said, when you get into March, you won't be able to do that of next year.
Well, let's hold off on March for a second. Once you made this registry setting, and a lot of companies will run tools to say what patches am I missing? Would those tools then say it has been patched, so it wouldn't keep trying to apply the same patch, or was that something you had to be careful of?
Well,
that you didn't make the same mistake.
Yeah, it is. And it's also, they built in some security alerts to let you know that. So if you're paying attention and watching it through maybe your WMI servers, you're able to see those errors if you do have a DCOM issue, versus once you've fixed it, then those errors would go away, and you could watch that through your network monitoring capability.
And where did you hear about this? So we're gonna talk a little bit about Rockwell in a second here, but so Rockwell has this issue. I know OPC. I don't know. I assume OPC has this issue because they rely on DCOM, the classic version.
They do.
Not OPC UA. What are some others that you've heard having to deal with this from a vendor side?
So the other one would be Siemens. So if any vendor, the automation technology vendor, which is where our focus is, if you just go to their websites, their advisory bulletins are publishing what you need to do to mitigate or remediate from this. So Siemens, Emerson, Honeywell, GE, they're all anybody that's leveraging DCOM will have published these advisories on their websites. And you can also, so that's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't know if I've seen anything from NIST or CISA on it that's been published. I haven't really taken a look back through them, but you can definitely find it from the automation technology vendors themselves.
Yeah, and again, that should be part of your patching program, that right. you are consulting with them, viewing their testing process to identify whether their problem was likely to occur or not. They can't guarantee you it won't happen, but they have these patch compatibility testing that have proven to be, especially on the larger vendors, to be timely and quite accurate, which was a major step forward, I think.
Yeah, and it also depends on the sophistication of the client and what they have for resources and skills in-house to deal with it, versus those that rely maybe on third parties, or the OEM themselves. Verticals, it's different, compared to very regulatory industries versus other industries that don't have as tight of controls, don't have the staff, don't have the technology, skill set, tool sets to be able to hunt this stuff down and look for it. Just the resources generally.
And now what is really pressing the issue is, if I have the date right here on it, I have March 14th, 2023. They say that you are the new, I don't know if it's a new patch from Microsoft, but something Microsoft is going to do is not going to let you disable this through the registry anymore.
Right.
How are they going to, how would they take that capability away?
Well, at that particular version, they're just basically going to disable it, so it can't be used anymore. Then you would have to use that more complex hardening DCOM version versus the one that they're basically removing from their system.
So that registry setting is going to go away.
Right.
If you update your operating system to whatever version at that point in time, after, I guess that's with the March updates, then it's not going to allow that anymore.
Right. You'd have to rely on a backup that you have in order to get your system back.
And then you would, I guess you always, as you mentioned earlier, you have the choice of saying, well, I'm not going to apply March, April, May, June on, some people, one response is just to stop applying Microsoft patches, right?
Right. Well, and I would argue that a lot of clients they don't patch their SCADA systems anyway. It's very rare for some. What I particularly find, I mean, there's some really great tools out there. You've talked about them in your podcast that you do. You know who they are. All of them have varying degrees of capability, be able to give you a really good, solid picture of your Windows status of your SCADA systems for those environments that aren't necessarily being controlled and managed by IT, and to give you your patch level, because right now you have to do certain things to be able to find out the exact patch level on a machine versus just saying, hey, I know that's a Windows 7 machine. And since it came out, it's got 800 common vulnerabilities and exposures to it. But in reality, it's probably been patched some. And there's different ways of being able to either active querying and or collect that information out of that machine to determine what its actual patch level is. Otherwise, it's kind of a manual process for those folks that don't have tools in place to go and discover this.
So March is going to be a hard date for people in the sense that they're going to have to make a decision. Are they going to upgrade to software that doesn't have this problem? When we're talking about ICS type software that doesn't have this problem, or they're going to have to change their patching approach. And it depends what their patch interval is, how fast they'll hit this. If they're patching monthly, they'll hit it in March. If they're patching semi-annually, they'll hit it sometime within 6 months, they'll have this issue. You were at Rockwell, right, before? I think you told me.
Correct. I was.
What'd you do with Rockwell?
I worked in the network security services team.
Okay.
Right. So anything to do with networking and security for control systems was part of my portfolio while I was there. And before that, I was in the Rock.
When did you leave Rockwell?
I left in 2018.
Oh, in 18. So fairly recently.
Yeah.
And I would say in the, I don't know if Rockwell's going to like this, but I would say in the enlightened time in Rockwell, I sort of push like from 2012, 2013, Rockwell seemed to get security religion and really has been a leader. I give them credit, has been a leader in the space in terms of adding features, supporting customers. Their bulletins are quite good. They're quite transparent. And that really, by 18, that was well underway. So you were there, I think, during the good times.
Yeah, well, I even go further back than that. I worked for a very large adult beverage manufacturer here in St. Louis, Missouri. You can probably guess who that is. And we worked really hard with Rockwell back in the late 90s and early 2000s, just getting it so that we could tie our control system to Windows, so we could create user groups, and security groups to gain access to read, write privileges into that control system environment. So now Rockwell's always been ahead of the game in this space, as far as I'm concerned. They've done a really, really good job. It's just that, the nature of the ICS environment is measured in decades versus, 4, 5, 6, 7 years on the IT world, right? Is the way we move technology on that side compared to our world, which it lingers around a while,
Yeah, That might be true. I think being ahead of the game in the 90s and 2000s wasn't saying too much. The game was so slow that it wasn't really there. But I do give them credit for what they've done in the last decade.
Yeah.
And I was looking at their site and how they're addressing this issue. And it looks like that for some time now, they've had versions available that address this problem. So if you are deploying a version that was issued sometime early this year, then you are able to apply the patch and it doesn't break things, which is great. That's what you expect your vendor to do.
Yep.
But the challenging part as I go through this affects so many products, and a lot of these products talk to each other using DCOM. So I think as I was reading their bulletin, one of the challenges for asset owners is it's not like, oh, I can slowly go through and update these systems. It's more of a case of, at least in the Rockwell, where they have to say, I'm going to bring the system down for a period of time. I'm going to update everything. And the Rockwell bulletin, I'm looking at a bulletin minimizing the system impact during Rockwell Automation DCOM patch application, which is really a nicely done bulletin. But they talk about the steps. They talk about the order of systems to patch. Really quite well done. But again, something that is not easy. You're going to have to look for an outage window or something where you can do this, and maybe have a strong rollback process in case it doesn't work. All that as a prelude, have you been involved in any upgrades of systems like Rockwell or Siemens?
Sure.
So that they do this, support this DCOM? And what are people looking at? Are they looking at hours, days? How long does such a thing take?
Well, it depends on how many plants do you have in your fleet, right? And then what do your resources look like to be able to do that? And then work through your downtime windows, as you stated, with the fragility of the supply chain. It is, some of these plants are running at well over 100%, right? Just running as much as they can. Taking downtime from them is a premium to do this, and then trying to determine how I'm going to tackle these patch updates, especially if I don't have a really good asset inventory of what I have in the field. And I would say that's a big challenge that many clients have, is not, excuse me.
Do you need to get a glass of water?
I do.
Okay. No worries.
Thank you.
I always have my coffee here, but that's more of a coffee crutch than a cough crutch. But
yeah.
We were talking about outage times and the challenge of that with this.
Yes.
With this patch.
Right. And then having the skill set, because no two plants are the same, right? So a lot of plants are very different in what they have, as far as not only the versions of maybe a Rockwell technology, but then they might also have multiple. Most do. I can't think of any client that has a singular automation technology vendor throughout their entire plant.
Yeah.
They usually have a handful or more. And so it's a challenge from that standpoint to be able to go at it across the board, multiple vendors to do this patch update. Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead and get another drink of water. I'll talk for a little bit here. I think, though, most would probably do this on a plant by plant basis. I don't think you would say we're going to bring all the plants down and we're going to update them all. If you did have some centralized software, there might be some risk there. So you might say, okay, plant, you're going to run autonomous without this centralized support. Or maybe I'm thinking if I was an asset owner and I had, let's say, 20 plants and I had a centralized system, I might spin up a second centralized system and have the legacy ones connecting to the legacy, the new ones connecting to new, and eventually roll the others over. But I think from a timing standpoint, I think most would probably look at it as a plant-by-plant basis with some elapsed time in months to say in 6 months, we're going to update all our plants as they go through their outage schedules.
Well, and a lot of these SCADA systems are buried behind, PLCs, meaning that there's not a clear line of sight from a centralized approach to get out to the edge in the environment that I've witnessed, right? Meaning there's a lot of stop gaps along the way to get further down into that panel where that HMI might be sitting. So
Yeah. And they probably are going to, I would think, they're going to patch locally. I don't see a lot of people yet, and maybe my visibility is low, but I don't see a lot of people doing the patching, let's say, off-site. Now, in a SCADA system, they might, because a pipeline, rail system, something like that, you have a wide geographic area. But if we're talking about a manufacturing plant, a water treatment plant, something that typically would use a Rockwell or a Siemens type system, a lot of times those are in local areas, and they would do the patching locally so that they're either line of sight or perhaps at least somewhere where they could walk down within a minute or two if something didn't appear to be running right. So I don't think that's going to be a huge issue. So let's take this the next step further. Then we say, okay, you could live with the patch or live with not patching Microsoft. That's one choice. You could, for example, take an outage time, and hopefully your vendor supports it and you can get up to the current version. But then what was interesting, and I think what you were touting, was there was some effort that Velta Technology and TX1 were working on as a stopgap. So you could continue to deploy most Microsoft patches after March, and the things would still work. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a, think of EDR for OT, right? The ability to put some type of endpoint detection response on, and then tailor make it for stopping certain patches. If you wanted to pick a particular patch from coming in, that you could select to be able to do that on your endpoint, on the IT endpoint running that operating system that would be susceptible to that DCOM patch, that you could block it. And this is a stopgap measure until the opportunity presented itself for you to do something longer term, which would be to get your applications updated across the board, or do the rewrites that you might need to do, or whether it's just a life cycle replacement of the system, to be able to apply newer technologies in your control system environment. And so we just started looking at some EDR endpoints, most of which are IT focused. This one here just more of an OT control system technology. And so as we were looking at it from intrusion prevention capability, I started digging into could I block this DCOM patch if I wanted to keep it from coming in? And so that's what we co-developed with TX1 on.
Okay, I want to get into that a little bit more, but how is that different than, for example, just not, let's say I have a patch management system. I have the ability in most of these patch management systems to say, here's 30 patches. I want to apply these 27, but I don't want to apply these 3. So why, if I was using a patch management system, why would I just not deselect this one DCOM patch?
Yeah, well, I don't think that a lot of clients even have a system like that in place. For a lot of them, they just don't. To just decide how to push those patch outs. It could come from an OEM. It could come in remotely. It could come in from the system integrator who's out there working, doing some work in the field. If it happens to be at your sites and decides to move the patch in, it can come in from a lot of different angles, and not just from a centralized patching system that the client may have.
But
to manage it.
If you look at, we talked about Siemens, Rockwell, it's also Emerson, Honeywell, Aviva, Schneider Electric. They all say, apply these patches, don't apply these patches. So you're already, as an asset owner, having to make that decision, right? You're already having to say, do I want to apply all these patches? So I would think the EDR solution would just almost prevent someone who doesn't have good control over their patching process from doing the wrong thing. It's almost like a belt and suspender sort of thing. You should be going through this process to determine if the patches can be deployed. But by the way, if you make a mistake, we know this one's bad, and what you're talking about would stop it. Is that accurate, or is there something else I'm missing?
No, I think that would be accurate. Again, it's just what tools do they have today to be able to do that? And I have not seen very many clients that have an organized, structured, standard approach to pushing out their patches. And a lot of times they don't even take patches. Like I said, they don't normally get them, or they have them. They don't even know they're there. They're just waiting for the machine to be rebooted, whatever it may take to do that. I was at a client last week, and 12 of their OT servers had been running for 400 days. That they haven't done any reboots, so to speak. So, and they didn't know if there was anything sitting on them that could immediately come in if they started booting those boxes. They just didn't know it was packed in there. They may not even know that those patches are sitting there ready to be applied.
Yeah.
But they're not monitoring the environment. I mean, not everybody's that way. I get it. Not every client operates that way, but there's many out there who do.
And 400 days is really not that much. I mean, there's probably I'm not saying from a security standpoint it's a lot, but from a industry standpoint, you'll see sometimes with things running for thousands of days. You know, and there's even things that people say, don't touch this, don't look at it wrong, because if it reboots, we don't know if it's coming back up. So
that's
when you do assessments or things like that, it's less so now than 10 years ago, but you'd run into these things. And it was kind of funny because the customer would say, this is a very important system. It can never go down. It's got to run 24/7. It's critical to us. Oh, and this little thing over here is super fragile and we rely on it. So don't look at that wrong. It was the dichotomy of those things was always amazing to me.
Well, I had a steel plant when WannaCry came out, and the CIO was looking for the vulnerabilities, and it existed in the server. To your point, it had been running for years. And when they went out there to go and decide to take a look at it, it had patches sitting there just waiting because it hadn't been booted in 3 or 4 years. And they knew that if they patched it, all these patches would fly and probably break their app. This is where I worked for Rockwell. So they hired us to come in and systematically go through to get them through those patches and not take the downtime, for that. And so they looked for assistance for that. And again, that's and in the OT space, you're going to find them always probably looking for a lot of assistance. Again, in certain industries, certain client size and scope, what the resource and capabilities are of, how do I prevent this from hurting me? And if I don't know about it, right. And it just the awareness, the conversations, Dale, that we've been having just in the past several months on this, some clients don't even know about this problem right now. They're not even familiar with it. And again, it's talking to the OT owners, not talking to the IT folks, they're talking to the OT owners about their DCOM status, and are they aware of what's coming and what Microsoft has put together this past year.
But they would have, the patch that Microsoft put out, if you didn't change you said later on they had something where you could select something so it wouldn't be applied, right? So maybe they were patching and they were noticing that and saying, don't apply it. But if they had tried to apply it, they would have had some outage issue if it was incompatible already. So they would have, what you're telling me is probably that they're not applying patches. These people that don't know they have it, because if they were applying patches, they would have gotten warnings or failures.
They would have gotten the alerts. And, my perspective on it is if I can look for a way to shield that endpoint, regardless of somebody just making a mistake, fat fingering it, inadvertently doing it, or even a bad actor who now recognizes that, hey, look, if we push these patches out, we can be very disruptive in this environment, is to be able to protect that endpoint, right? So instead of it coming from some, the way you were describing a while ago, if, the WMI server that's pushing out patches to be able to control that, well and good. It's kind of like a firewall a little bit, managing and controlling the firewall. But who's watching the firewall? Right? Who's managing that piece? Who's making sure that that the updates that they didn't create a new port, a new unsecure protocol floating in my environment, remote access into my environment, if I'm not watching it, right? And that's really, to me, is one of the keys, is how do I get my eyes on what's going on inside this environment? Because I'm a big believer that OT needs to be able to recognize that their networks are being scanned. They need to recognize if they've got remote access that's not valid. They should know the weaknesses in their environment, just like IT does, right? I mean, the same amount of due diligence you're applying on one side, you should be thinking about applying on the other side. And if you're not, why aren't you doing that? And if I can protect that endpoint until I can get to a more hardened DCOM protocol in my environment, then I will do everything I can to protect that endpoint if I can. And that's what that whole conversation was about, as far as block the patch, as we call it.
I guess I'm not quite aligned with you on that. Not that so I see what you're talking about, and I think if I had an endpoint protection system that provided that capability, I would leverage it. Right?
Like
If I'm already,
CrowdStrike.
I already bought this product. It allows me to block certain activities, including deployment of certain patches.
Mhm.
If I ever saw not just this patch, but if I ever got from my vendor, hey, this patch is incompatible, I would go through my endpoint detection management system on OT, and I would say, let's add this to all the systems. So I see the value in that. I guess where I differ a little bit is you should not be getting patches applied without some patch program. This idea
Mhm.
that all these patches are sitting on OT waiting to be automatically deployed at a certain time point, I don't see that. I guess I'm a little bit biased because I deal with people that care a lot about security, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you don't read my content, watch my show, go to S4 if
Mhm.
you're not pretty serious about security. And there's
Right.
probably the other 80-90% of the market that isn't as sophisticated who might allow these patches to flow in. But I think if you're allowing patches to flow in, you have a much bigger problem. Flow in and be applied automatically, you have a much bigger problem than this. So I guess maybe I'll let you comment on
Well,
that, but I guess we
sure.
see that a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, and I would say I don't find a lot of EDR on OT endpoints, especially on the Windows machines, where I would find CrowdStrike or McAfee or Semantics on the far end. It's not the OEMs and SIs aren't necessarily putting that stuff out there just because of the nature of it could the scanning of the system that it does, the taxing of the performance, what it may do or may not do. Most of them are IT based solutions that you're trying to shoehorn into the OT environment. That's one thing I would say is I don't find a lot of EDR endpoints out there like CrowdStrike. I know they're in the environment. I mean, if you look at what Rockwell's doing with their new SOC setup, and I thought it was very interesting in what they said at Automation Fair. I don't know, do you ever attend Rockwell Automation Fair? You've been to any of those events over
I
the
have
years?
not been to that yet. That's on my list, so I haven't been there.
Yeah, they had a really good one in Chicago just right before Thanksgiving. And what they said, and this is coming from Cisco, Microsoft, Clarity, Dragos, who are all part of this partnership with Rockwell, is you still got 60% of critical infrastructure and manufacturing environments that are still in the unaware phase around OT cybersecurity. 60%. And you got 30% that have started doing something, right? They started scratching the surface. They got tools. They're forming teams. They're putting budgets together.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of getting down the path and starting to do something. Duty of care. And you got 10% that are at that optimization integration level in
Right.
that whole thing. So there's still a big gap, in our industry getting caught up to be as sophisticated and standardized as the IT world mature around security in this space. It's coming. Just as we gain resources, as our technology matures, as people become more aware of the weaknesses and vulnerabilities in their environment, it's just going to take a while for us to get there. And so going through that, and EDR will be something we will find in this environment, just like you'll find sensors or collection servers moving forward in the panels. Just like
Mm-hmm.
they put Ethernet switches in there and they got computers out there, they're going to start putting in some type of um, security and safety mechanisms inside those panels from a digital perspective as they start building these machine centers going forward.
Well, I guess when you talk about this 60% or whatever the number is, that are, and I guess it depends on how you define what aware is. It could be larger or smaller, but I would say anything over 50% is realistic number. It's certainly not less than 50% in the manufacturing space that is not really focused on cybersecurity. And one of the challenges with something like this DCOM issue is it tends to lead to people having new mantras that are harmful. So for a long time, it was you can't run antivirus on control systems.
Mhm.
And the reason you couldn't run antivirus on control systems for the most part was they were running 15-year-old computers that were that were pegged on memory and everything else. So it wasn't that you couldn't run it, you just needed a better computer. And I guess my biggest worry with this DCOM issue is you have one of those 60% and somebody finally gets religion and says, we're going to apply some patches. Patching is good. They apply patches and it breaks things. And then the lesson from that is you can't patch OT. Yep. And then we already hear that mantra already. And every time there's a failure that's due because they don't have a sufficient patching process in place, that just makes it harder to convince all the people in operations. Because a lot of times it's someone from IT coming in to operations, doing something, breaking something, and then forever, IT gets a stiff arm. They say, you can't come in here anymore.
No, you're 100% right. I agree with that.
Hopefully we won't run into that.
No, I agree. Because like I said, when I worked for the brewery, as I would say, that was our strategy, is we didn't jump on patches just because IT wanted us to try to keep up with them. We got down to doing it maybe 3 times a year to get our patches in, and even then it would take us several weeks, 2 months from start to finish by the time we could get through and do just getting the subject matter experts together to do the testing in the lab and start the rollout process, and started tracking everything down, working around unplanned or downtime windows, maintenance windows, to get a patch in, so you're talking about almost a 2-month project.
Yeah. Well, and I have to be careful here. We could get into a whole patching show, but I'm not a big fan of patching everything every month. I'm much more in the now, next, never. That there are some things you want to patch within days, like you're exposed to attack surface, and other things on a schedule, and other things, some panel running XP directly connected to a PLC. I'm not sure. Or even, let's say it's even a current version of Windows, I'm not sure how terribly important it is to patch that. And we have a decision tree ICS patch that helps people guide through that. I'm not saying it's exactly the one you should use, but you really need to think as an asset owner what needs to be patched when, and don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. Hey, we're going to patch everything every quarter. You're much better off saying, well, patch 5% or maybe 10 cyber assets immediately, and then a bunch more every 6 months, and maybe some only when the software is going to end of life or something of that nature.
Yeah, I think this one, though, on the DCOM side, at least they should be aware of where those vulnerabilities exist for them so that they know, right? And have that documented and well understood to make that decision on what they're going to do from there. Whether it's micro-segmenting their network, or putting in some type of EDR capability, or do the best they can just to dance around that patch and hope they don't get it.
Yeah. Okay. Then just kind of as a wrap up here. So I'm guessing that some of the people at Velta Technology actually, do you guys get involved, or you guys and gals get involved with actually updating these systems to deal with this problem? Or is that more of a Rockwell integrator who does that sort of thing, or Siemens integrator?
It'll be the OEMs and the SIs. We've partnered with those groups. We do a lot of stuff around the networking capability. We're a full-blown Cisco partner. So we pretty follow the CPWE model, that converged plant-wide Ethernet framework, to assist with that, with segmenting the network, firewalls, the networking piece. But I don't get into PLC programming or HMI development or putting in the control systems. We let the client work with their trusted vendors they already work with on that front.
Okay, well, that's great. I've been talking with Dino Busalachi with Velta Technologies in the podcast studio there at Velta Tech, and I hope that your cough gets better. I know it's always frustrating. It's always frustrating once you're on stage or something like that to happen to you. But I appreciate you soldiering through and making it through the show, and hope you have a happy holiday.
You too. Thank you. Maybe see you in February.